the man immediately to my left was born on a farm in Iowa.
In the howling winds.
In the howling winds of the Great American Plains. Founding percussionist of the Bang on a Can All-Stars, founding member of and artistic director of the percussion group Redfish Bluefish, who I'm quite confident we will see right here 1 year from now. Music director of the La Jolla Symphony, distinguished professor of music at UCSD, the University of California, San Diego, and music director of the 2015 Ojai Music Festival, Steven Schick.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Fred.
And Steve, there are several things I want to ask you about next year, but first of all, what does it mean to be the music director of the Ojai Music Festival? What does that actually entail?
I was going to just ask that question of Tom. I think we're figuring this out, what it means as we go along, but I can tell you, the day that Tom Morris calls you and says, would you like to be the music director of the Ojai Festival, is a good day. That's a very good day because first of all, the venerable history of the festival, the fact that I've played as a percussionist here on 3 occasions, watching music directors shape and fold their individual artistic and aesthetic tastes into a fascinating festival such as the one we're hearing right now. And the thought that then one could engage that process for oneself is just an amazing and not a little bit daunting possibility. So I guess being music director means being in an interesting conversation with Tom and with the other artists who will play and having the chance to collaboratively engage a process that will result in a great festival.
And this is something, what you just mentioned, the conversation with Tom, this is something that every music director of the Ojai Festival I've spoken with has mentioned that right at the beginning of the conversation about what it means. And Tom works kind of behind the scenes as artistic director, but has a real role in working with each music director to shape the choice of music and the flow and how things go. And I'm curious to hear from both of you about how that conversation is playing out. I know there's still a year yet to go until the festival, where Steve, where you'll be a music director, but what kind of shape has that conversation taken?
Well, I should say that there are 2 goals that I have, or 2 roles really in this. First is I'm the lucky guy who gets to choose the music director. And then even better than that is then to work with the music director in shaping a festival. And in shaping a festival, the great thing about this structure is that it absolutely demands constant reinvention with a different music director each year. And the goal is to build a program which fits what Ojai believes and what it stands for, but also that reflects the artistic personality of the music director. And so when this starts, usually about 3 years ahead, it starts a series of long conversations that usually results at some point in enough music and programs for about 6 festivals.
Oh, at least, yes.
And it's an iterative process. I think the interesting part of it is not just the discussions, but I'm a great believer in ruminating between the conversations and let it sort of soak in and look at what you've done and figure out where you can improve it.
Jeremy Denk, music director of the current festival, the 2014 festival, has talked about the opera that premiered on Friday night as a completely insane idea that, Tom, when you heard, you said, yeah, of course we'll do that. Steve?
And I've heard him tell others now, but when I said that, he went back to some friends and said, what do I do now?
There's an aspect of being a percussionist. I mean, you're describing how you don't play just one instrument, right. You play whatever happens to be there. There's an aspect of being a percussionist that is kind of a philosophy of life. And I wonder if you have a kind of heightened awareness of the rhythm of your feet on the pavement as you're walking down the street, and the rhythms that might appear out of car horns and bird sounds every day around you. Do you hear these things in a musical way?
You know, I do, but I've trained myself to hear the out of doors. I've trained myself to hear natural sounds. To me, these are the portals for music. So when I hear a rock rolling down a cliff as I hike, I think of that as music, and I go through that door, and that becomes a noise which makes sense to me then on the concert stage. I mean, I also play the marimba and the vibraphone, and I conduct a symphony orchestra, so I have another life. But I think the thing that is closest to my heart really is this world of fascinating noises that tells us where we are and how we are living. I think of myself as actually a sort of linguist in a land of noises. And you and I talked about this story, which I'm sorry my wife Brenda might be tired of hearing, but she's only heard it about 14,000 times, which is that I walked the length of the California coast in order to propose to her. This was 7.5 years ago. And I started in San Diego on the Mexican border, and I walked to San Francisco. I crossed the Golden Gate Bridge. I slapped the sign that said Marin County. We went out to dinner at a restaurant that had valet parking, and I asked her to marry me. So that was that day. That was a good day. And
This didn't all happen, this walk didn't take one day.
no, it was 6.5 weeks of walking, but the really good day was the day it stopped. And I tell that story because walking the length of the California coast means that you're constantly engaged in this world of noise that tells you where you are. I walked through Los Angeles in the height of the immigration debate, and you could hear 5 languages at once. I walked through Camp Pendleton in the middle of the war in Iraq, and you could hear from one side the sound of the Stuart Mesa Elementary School where the children were playing, and from the other ear you heard a firing range where the soldiers were practicing with tanks and machine guns. And I thought, through your ears, you know where we are, what we're thinking. We know where we are in the world. Walking up the Big Sur coast, where you know this Highway 1, where in a car, you go up and down those hills. They're about 400 or 500 feet like this. You go up and down every minute. When you're walking, it takes you 3 hours. And so you walk up, the sound of the surf starts to diminish, the sound of the birds gets louder, the sound of the trees finally takes over. You get to the top, you can barely hear the ocean. And then you come down, and the birds get softer, and the surf gets louder. And it's this great big mixing board in which someone every 3 hours is bringing ocean up, birds. And 22 miles a day was basically the average, and for that, I didn't do anything else for 6.5 weeks except listen. It was amazing.
Are there any commissions that we can talk about at this point that we'll hear in 2015?
Tom?
Yes, we are one of the co-commissioners of a new piece by John Luther Adams, who everyone here knows. This is a piece called Sela. And Sela, you all remember, I think, in Uxuit 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. In Uxuit, we performed with 48 players in the park. Sela calls for 80. And it's another spatial piece, and that'll be done in Libby Park. And again, will be a free community concert. I mean, I should just say that one of the things that Steve and I have tried to do with this particular festival coming up is to make it far more interactive with the community than we have so far. So there's a lot of these kinds of events which will take place.
There's also a long tradition of inviting resident artists or ensembles. Who will be the other musicians joining you?
Well, this is the great privilege, is to be able to say to your friends and longtime collaborators, come to Ojai. I mean, that alone, come to Ojai, is a wonderful phrase, right? Because it's so beautiful here, it's so wonderful. And so we said, come to Ojai, to the International Contemporary Ensemble, ICE, which are old friends. I'm their artist in residence now, and have worked with them for 4 or 5 years, 5 years now.
Again, a group not dissimilar to the Knights of Collective, basically out of New York and Chicago.
There is the percussion group Redfish Bluefish, which I know you have heard at various points. That's the group I started at UC San Diego. A little chamber orchestra that is also out of San Diego called Renga. And then good friends, Maya Beiser, a co-member of Bang on a Can All-Stars. We started that group together now turns out quite a long time ago. And Wuman, the great pipa player. And so it'll be a star-studded, sort of event, I think.
In a
And
few,
we're not quite done.
Oh,
There
yes.
may be
maybe some more. Okay. In a few minutes, I want to open this up for your questions. So if you have questions for Steve or Tom about the 2015 festival, think of those, and we'll open it up to you here in a minute. There's always a visual aspect to the festival as well. Films are sometimes involved, theatrical presentation. What kind of visuals can we expect?
yes and yes. But one of the, there will be, one evening is basically featuring Steve as a solo percussion player and performing, I think, 6 or 7 works on the most incredible array of instruments, including yourself.
Yes, yeah.
Which you will explain in a minute, and a theatrical work that you have had commissioned based on a very strange piece of music called the Ur Sonata.
Firms beverteet se oper gifkvi det desen buftil totul yuka rinskit baby inskermju tsiu insitu rinskermju. It's a Dada poem written in the 1920s. It's about 35 minutes in length, and Kurt Schwitters took those nonsense, in quotes, nonsense syllables and arranged them in musical form so that the first movement is a sonata form and the second movement is adagio, and then there's a scherzo and a rondo. And it's an astonishing thing. We were talking the other day about how this is to language what percussion is to sound. In other words, you take things which you think have a certain purpose, you get rid of that purpose, and you make them into something else. And that, to me, is really important about Ur Sonata. And that will be a staged version, so with video and multi-channel sound and with me acting, with moving as an actor. And then all percussion music is theatrical. Percussion music goes thousands of years back into world traditions. So the 20th century sometimes sort of arrogantly presumes that it invented percussion. It's not true. Of course, if you look at tabla playing or the gamelan or African drumming, you're talking about ancient traditions. The very first music that human beings made was percussion, and voice, of course, as well. But the Western tradition, of which I guess I'm a practitioner, is recent. And in the world of solo percussion music, the oldest piece that exists is younger than I am. Another way of putting it is that I'm older than my repertoire. And you can imagine what that would mean for a violinist or a pianist, to be older than the oldest piece for that person's repertoire. It's an astonishing kind of thing. So I think I've seen, even though I was only 4 when that piece was written, I have seen over the course of my adult lifetime the growth of a very vital art form, which will be presented in a kind of very rich way, at least on one of the evenings of the festival in a solo performance.
You've just suggested the possibility of something that I think the Ojai Music Festival would be perfectly suited to realize, which would be a vampire violinist.
A vampire violinist.
500
you heard it
years
here
old.
first.
You're talking about the nature of, you're talking about percussion and the nature of percussion. There's a kind of, there's an element of physicality in playing any musical instrument. And when you watch somebody like Joshua Bell, he's very physical the way he plays the violin. But physicality is an innate part of percussion. You have a kind of physical relationship with all the instruments you're playing, and it kind of resonates into your body, too.
The gestural world of percussion communicates so directly, because unlike the violin, which is a very physical medium also, those motions and movements, those physical gestures don't have external meanings in the same way that percussion does. A percussionist hits, strikes, damps, brushes, caresses, maneuvers, all of those things, all of the actions that a percussion does have resonance in the outside world. So when you see a percussionist, and actually, if I can tell you, one of the favorite pictures of myself performing, and I regret that this picture seems now to be lost, or at least I can't find it. When I was a student at the University of Iowa, I would often play contemporary percussion music for a class of hearing-impaired children. Never mind why that was a good idea, but it seemed to be a good idea at the time. And there is a picture of me, and I was wound up to play an enormous backhand stroke on the gong. I had hair at that point, and it was long. And so the hair was flowing, and you could just see weight on one leg, and it's going to be loud. And in the front, you can see the deaf children who may not even really hear this sound, and one of them has his hands in his ears. Because whether he will hear it or not, he knows that this means loud. And that's what percussion does. It telegraphs intention, and it telegraphs a kind of gestural spirituality, if you'll forgive that phrase, where the inside comes out very quickly because of the palpable aspect of the gesture.
I, for one, am very much looking forward to seeing what the two of you can come up with and put together. And it's going to be a fascinating festival on so many levels, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this percussion slash dance slash physicality element plays out over the course of the festival.
Great. Thank you so much for a great conversation.
Steven Schick and Tom Morris.
Thank you. Thanks. And thank all of you.